Welcome back to part 2 of Setting the Boundaries. Teaching teenagers to take increasing responsibility for their lives means explaining clearly to them what our expectations are.
Teenagers will sense whether or not we trust them to make good decisions, and will usually rise to what we expect of them. So, we need to make our expectations clear. These might include that they're responsible for getting themselves up in the morning and ready for school on time, that they're responsible for getting their homework done and taking the right books and sports gear to school.
We also need to make clear what we expect them to do around the house and what we expect them to pay for with their own money.
We've helped our children to take responsibility in a number of ways. I think early on we've had them make their own telephone calls to the school if they were going to be late, or to make a doctor's appointment. You know, we would give them more responsibility for this as they increased in age. But we've always tried to help them do their own practical calling. I think especially with calling, because it's difficult when you're young to know how to approach an adult and how to cancel, you know, a commitment you've made. I can remember when you were, you didn't want to babysit a couple of times, and you kind of wanted us somehow to solve that problem. And we would say, no, you have to call the babysitter and cancel, or say that you don't want to come.
From the age of 13, both Alexander and Oliver had to take their own responsibilities in travelling to school, because they're coming back by train and actually going by train at weekends. It was all their own decision-making, and I had to actually let go and trust that they will find their way. It was a very difficult thing for me when it started.
Obviously, you can't get to 18 and suddenly say, right, it's your 18th birthday today, anything goes, you're out there, you're on your own, you're an adult now. You have to let them experience things and try things before they get there. Otherwise, they'll be completely shell-shocked and won't know what to do with the freedom they have.
Teaching our teenagers responsibility means allowing them to learn from the consequences of their own mistakes. And it's important we're not always rescuing them.
I remember one of our boys losing the key to his sports locker, and as a result, he couldn't get his kit out for the practice, and so the team's coach said he couldn't play in the match on Saturday. My temptation was to run out and buy him some new kit, as playing in the team meant so much to him. But I stopped myself, because I realised that wasn't going to help him become more responsible about looking after his things. And actually, he really minded about missing the match and learnt a lot from the whole incident.
It had been a running issue, hadn't it, with lateness? Yeah. And you had nagged him, and you had had a go at him, and you had told him how much it means to you, and you used your iMessages, and nothing was working. And so this particular night we decided, let's not stress, let's hatch a plan.
It's just, yes, absolutely.
So we called at 10:30 and he wasn't answering his mobile, and so we called his girlfriend's mum. She said, oh, he's here. So I said, oh, send him my love. And he came up, didn't he, when he got home?
Yeah, well, he got home and he was expecting the same deal, you know. Why are you late? You know, we gave you all the time, the whole thing. And then we have a bit of an argument, and he goes off to bed a bit stroppy, and he comes back and apologizes. But no, we thought, I'm sick of stressing. So we just said, how's your evening? He goes, great. And did you have fun? Yeah. And he's waiting for it.
Yeah. And he's going, are we okay?
Are we okay?
Yeah, good, yeah. Sleep well?
Yeah. Good night, sweetheart. So off he goes to bed. The next day, we're off to church, and he needs to be he plays football after church, and he needs to be at the ground at
1:45.
1:45.
We had to be out of church by 1:15.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So he could get to the ground by 1:45.
He's never late for football.
Never late. So we're in church, it's 1:15, and he goes, we better go. He went over to you, didn't he?
Yeah, hopping from one foot to the other. No, she can't interrupt. And I go, I'll just have my coffee then. And he goes over to you.
He comes over to me, he goes, Dad, we got to go. I said, yeah, I'm just going to have this cup of coffee. I'm having a chat. So
back to me. And then back to you, and you spoke to him, didn't you?
1:30, 1:45.
Oh, we were loving it.
He's doing backflips. He's going, we've got to go. And I said, Henry, that's fine, darling. Look, I've noticed that time isn't important to you, okay? Oh, this is about last night, isn't it? No, but if it's not important, it's fine.
We feel a bit chilled this morning.
So we're just going to relax, and we go when we go. He couldn't believe it. Anyway, so finally I pulled the car around. He couldn't get in there fast enough.
Oh, he was throwing the children in the car. And I go, I'm just going to the toilet. And he hurled himself out of a moving car when we finally got to football, didn't he?
He did.
And what he didn't know is we called the coach ahead, hadn't we?
We told the coach he's going to be late. We got an issue.
Discipline number this morning.
So since then, we didn't have any problems.
He's not late anymore.
No, he runs home to get home on time. So.
Or he'll phone again. I think I'm going to be about 30 seconds late.
Poor kid.
There's no more effective way for our children to learn self-control and to develop those internal self-imposed boundaries than when we allow them to learn from their own mistakes.
We as parents need to allow our teenagers to make mistakes. Mistakes teach us things. We learn through mistakes. There's a lovely saying, the only mistake in life we make is one we don't learn from. But so many of us parents don't want our children to make mistakes. I remember my father saying to me, Julie, I don't want you to make mistakes in life. And I remember saying to him, but Dad, I need to in order to learn about who I am for myself. It isn't easy. We need to stand back, and there are some mistakes that are very serious, quite obviously, but a lot of mistakes that teenagers make, they can learn from, we can talk through with them, and they can actually then develop skills and ability to manage the situation differently next time. Mistakes are the stuff of life. When do we learn most in life? Possibly when we make mistakes.
There's the balance between trusting them and letting them take risks. Our role as parents changes over 18 years or so, from initially when they were little, being in control of and involved in every aspect of their lives, to being available eventually to help with advice when they seek it. This change is critical.
Parents face two options. We can keep using the same patterns we used when they were young and frustrate ourselves to death. Or we can realise that our methods must change as our teenagers develop. Daniel Hahn, a youth pastor, writes, as hard as it is, our role must move from controller to consultant. What do consultants do? They ask questions, offer opinions, share experiences, present options and forecast outcomes. Ultimately, however, they step back and allow the client to make decisions.
Now, of course, the change happens gradually through the teenage years, with them taking on increasing amounts of responsibility.
Personally, I've loved this change of role from controller to consultant because it's been part of building my relationship with our children as they become adults. And we found that it set a pattern so that now, as adults and making their own decisions, they've continued coming back to us for advice when they need it.
The author Mark Twain famously said, "When I was 14, my old man was so ignorant I could hardly stand to have him around me. When I got to be 21, I was amazed how much wisdom he'd acquired in just 7 years."
We want to look at what helps in this gradual process of moving from controller to consultant. First and foremost, don't nag. Not least because nagging, tempting though it is for parents, is ineffective and will push us apart.
The sociologist and author Tony Campolo has written this advice for parents. You might not consider it nagging, but it is nagging when you keep on making the same point over and over again, continually trying to drive home the same message. It doesn't take long for children who are under a steady bombardment of repetitious directives to turn off. In some cases, nagging even drives children to do the opposite of what their parents want.
You know, I sometimes come across mums and dads who are very controlling, and they say, I can't help myself. I'm saying, comb your hair, your shirt's hanging out, do your homework like this, and I say, but you must help yourself. If you don't stop doing that, two things are going to happen. Number one, you're going to drive a wedge between you and that child. And secondly, it will be hard for that child to believe that something really matters to you because you're going on about everything. You can fight some battles, but you can't fight them all. It's as if the child is 13 years old and they're on a circus high wire and they're trying to get through to age 21. And you know, they're doing pretty well, but they're wobbling a bit. But his mother's underneath saying, tuck your shirt in, comb your hair. Sometimes we have to back off a little. We can fight some battles, but we can't fight them all.
A second way to move from controller to consultant is to make as few rules as possible. Some friends who had teenagers before we did gave us a piece of advice that stayed with us. We say no to the things that really matter and yes to everything else. Each of us needs to decide what our non-negotiables are going to be, what really matters.
The values that really matter to us about our teenagers are essentially ones to do with other people, how they relate in society. So just their ability to listen, to respect, to honour, to look for the best in others, are things we really want to encourage. And so sort of attitudes or language that they've maybe picked up that appears to dishonour that, we're quite tight on it, you know, firm but gentle. We're not massively bothered about if bedrooms being tidy or kind of property being totally respected. We just recognise that stuff which comes and goes, okay, but people, they should be handled with sort of trust and respect.
As well as making clear the importance we attach to respect for others, another non-negotiable was no drugs. Of course, we couldn't control whether or not they took them, but I remember Benj saying to us that having no drugs as a non-negotiable as a teenager helped to give him the confidence to say no when he needed to and deep down wanted to.
He also said his friends came to know he wouldn't take drugs, and that made it a lot easier for him.
If we're parenting as a couple, we need to discuss what our non-negotiables are and have a united approach.
For those who are parenting on their own or step-parenting, it can be more complicated. But the more agreement and consistency there is, the better.
With two families, you often get conflicting rules from two households, and those are areas where we've sometimes come up against friction, I suppose, is probably the right way to put it, where we've ended up having to say, well, actually, we need to set rules for what's the way it works in this house.
Third, we must be sure we can explain the reasons for the limits we've set. With young children, sometimes we have to tell them, because I say so. But teenagers need an explanation for boundaries.
So, if we insist that they're home by a particular time on a school night, we must explain why. For example, that they need enough sleep so they're able to concentrate in school the next day.
Or if we insist on them having a tidier room or shorter hair, we must be able to explain why.
Lawrence Steinberg, Professor of Psychology at Temple University, observed, "What causes adolescents to rebel is not the assertion of authority, but the arbitrary use of power with little explanation of the rules and no involvement in decision-making."
One of our rules was not to allow our teenagers to smoke and having consequences if we saw or heard of them doing so.
Our explanation for why we did not want them to smoke included the longer-term health risk, the cost, worth asking them to think of better ways to spend the price of 10 cigarettes a day over 60 years, the difficulty of giving up once addicted, the smell, which will cause some people to keep their distance, and the effect on their level of fitness, particularly if they're interested in sport. And we had to repeat our reasons quite regularly.
The thing that really annoyed me when I was that age was that, when I asked for something and Mum said no, and she didn't give me a reason as to why I couldn't go out later or something like that, it really bugged me because I thought she was just doing it because she was jealous because I was, having fun and young and she was old and boring,
I think the best way to tell teenagers what to do is just explain to them, especially if it's a situation you've gone through, that the parent has gone through, I think you just need to sit down and explain to the children, your teenager, that you made that same decision and the consequences it had for you, and then try to relate that to them. Well, I don't think they should tell us teenagers what to do is, just flat up come to us and say, no, you can't do this, or no, you can't do that. They also need to give us a good reason as to why.
A fourth way of making this gradual move from controller to consultant is to be prepared to negotiate. Negotiating with our teenagers means being prepared to discuss the boundaries with them and making compromises so that we work out rules together that are fair and both of us can accept.
It's how we put the boundaries in place, and as they get older, they're moving from parental control to self-control. And if we are just too authoritarian and want to control everything, we aren't giving them the freedom or the space to grow and make mistakes. And so we need to be firm, but we need to also agree and discuss and decide some of the boundaries together. So it is about being firm, but it is about listening and hearing their perspective. And I think for parents, sometimes our fears actually block us from enjoying our teenagers because we're so afraid for them that those fears become controlling and don't give them that space to move out. I mean, if they're 15, then we only have like 1,000 days. That might sound a lot, but we started off with sort of 6,000 or 7,000 days of their lives. And, you know, at 16, we've, 600 or 700 days left. And you suddenly realize that in a timescale, that's quite a short period of time. And yet we expect them at 18 to be able to live independent, responsible lives. But we really have a responsibility to put boundaries, but not restrict them from becoming good adults with the ability to make decisions and work things out for themselves.
As we've said, some boundaries will be non-negotiable, but there are many others we need to negotiate, such as what time they need to be home, where they're allowed to go, whether or not they can go to a particular party. With these kind of issues, there's a lot of room for negotiation.
Negotiation requires discussion. As our teenagers get older, it's healthy for them to contribute more and more to decisions affecting their lives. Negotiation facilitates that sort of discussion.
Author Tim Smith describes how, when we spend time debating with our teenagers, we demonstrate respect by taking the time and focus to spar intellectually with them. This helps the development of their logic and reasoning abilities. It also helps them feel that their viewpoint is valid enough to discuss. He writes, "A teenager reasons, if they value my opinion enough to debate it, they must value me enough to try to understand me."
I don't think that they should dictate to them, because I think the more that parents will dictate to teenagers, the more that they want to rebel against that. But to kind of find it somewhere in between, to say, well, you can do this, but you can't do that, or just to create some kind of in between where you'll say, well, you can go out and do this if you do this as well. If you do well like this, then you can go out and have fun. Which I think it definitely works, because if you say you can't do that, then people, teenagers especially, will just rebel against it and do what they want.
Rather than saying no, she probably should have talked it through with me more, you know, found out, you know, whether I was going to be safe, you know, the timings, if I had a plan about everything, how I was going to get there, how I was going to get back. That would show that, you know, I had thought it through and it wasn't just a spontaneous little jaunt to someone's house. So if we'd set out the plan of my night, she would have been able to see that it was a lot calmer than it maybe worked out in her head. So, yeah, she should have probably talked it through before saying a flat out no.
OK, I think my advice, which I found very helpful, was my parents were able to meet me halfway. So if I wanted to go out of a school evening and I'd say, oh, Mum, can I go out till 9 o'clock? And she'd go, have you got homework? And I'd be like, yes. She'd go, do you want to make it 7:30 and then you come back and do your homework, or do your homework now and it can be 8:30? She'd always meet me halfway. It wouldn't be a straight turn around and go no and then just go back to what she's doing. She'd always try to please me, or so that we were both satisfied with what we were doing and we were both happy with it.
There are two dangers for parents. One is always changing our mind. The other is never changing our mind.
With teenagers, we must be prepared to change our minds, not because it's easier, not because we've been worn down, but because we've been persuaded by their reasoning. Equally, there'll be times when we have to hold firm.
We know someone who, as a teenager, was highly irresponsible with money. His parents kept giving in to his demands and bailing him out. But this was really a disservice to him, as he was not learning to take responsibility and budget what he had. Now he's in his 20s, he still hasn't learnt to budget and has run into more serious financial difficulties.
One day she came with a list of reasons why she should go to bed later than she did, and had a meeting, and that was she got what she wanted, didn't she? Yeah. But a very mature way of going about it, you know, blah, blah, I will get up on time and go to school, didn't she? And very clever. She's very clever.
We have had times when we've had to negotiate with our teenagers, and one that I remember well is when Hannah wanted to go to a party and to sleep over the evening. And I can remember I had real reservations about the home that she was staying in, and I wasn't really sure. And so we had to sit down and talk about it, because I realised it wasn't easy for her, because everybody else was probably staying the night, and so she'd be the odd one out. If she came home, or indeed if she didn't go. So we sat and talked about it, and we did actually come up with the agreement that she could go to the party and that we would let her stay a little later than normal, but that we would be there to pick her up late in the evening. I think we picked her up about 11 o'clock, maybe 12. But the amazing thing is, actually, when we picked her up, she was really glad that we had come and picked her up, because things were going the way that she really was uncomfortable with, and actually she was glad to come home.
When we get it right, we normally sit down and have a proper negotiation, and when we get it wrong, we just say, this is it.
That's true.
Fifth, we need to work out appropriate consequences if and when our teenagers overstep an important boundary. Otherwise, we're not teaching them responsibility.
If they abuse our trust by coming back later than we have said, or going where they're not allowed, or lying to us, there needs to be a consequence. Sometimes there's a natural consequence we can allow them to suffer. At other times, we need to work out what will best act as a disincentive for them not to repeat their behaviour.
I remember a time when I told my parents I was going to do a football tournament in the evening, just a little thing, and it was only 2 seconds away from the door, and after that me and my friend and we went and saw some girls down the local park, and we were out there. I think I was only about 15, and we were out there till 10 o'clock, and Dad had to drive to come and find me, and so I was grounded for 2 weeks, and that was pretty hard to accept because my friend wasn't. So yeah,
one time I was ringing mobiles off of our landline, and that costs quite a lot, and I was staying on for like 3 hours, and I kept doing it again and again, and when the phone bill came in, my mum saw the phone bill and it went up by £30, and my punishment for that was I had to pay about £25 of that, but that was the right punishment, because I've never done that again, and I never will.
The closer the connection between the boundary that's been crossed and the consequence, the more effective it will be. So, one couple decided that if their teenager was home later than they'd agreed, they would double the number of minutes the teenager was late, and the next time she had to come back that much earlier.
We need to take time to consider what is appropriate. If the consequence we impose is too lenient, it will have no effect. On the other hand, if it's too harsh, it will cause resentment.
With younger children, the consequence needs to be more immediate, so that it's clearly linked to the offence.
With older children, we can take longer to decide. In fact, several days is fine, and it gives them plenty of opportunity to think over what they've done. We can say to our teenager, "I'm not sure what to do about this straight away, but I'll let you know."
The most appropriate consequence might be stopping their allowance, refusing their next invitation to a party, not allowing them to stay over with friends, banning the TV or computer games for a night or a week if it's more serious, setting them a task like cleaning the car, sweeping up leaves or doing the ironing.
Sometimes, however, being caught out and knowing our disappointment is enough.
My parents have trusted me. Well, actually, they didn't really trust me at one point, where I was sort of fell into the whole peer pressure thing and was wanting to go to parties with my friends and knowing that my parents wouldn't like me to do that. So I would lie, and they would find out.
I remember the one time where we found out, and you had told us you were at a house and you weren't there, and we went to the house just because we happened to be driving down the street and phoned you, and you said, that was awful, wasn't it?
It was.
You said, well, I'm babysitting, and we said, well, we're at the babysitter's, and you don't look like you're there, and so you got caught.
Yeah, and I think when I did get caught, that's when I knew I can't be doing this. I don't want to be in a situation where I'm feeling such anxiety and
guilt.
Guilt, yeah. It was bad, but I think we've definitely built trust.
You had to build it up again after that.
Yeah.
One final point in setting boundaries that was invaluable to us was the alarm clock tip. When our teenagers got to the age of returning from a party, after the time we wanted to go to bed, we put an alarm clock just outside our bedroom door, set for the time by which they had to return. Their task was to turn the alarm clock off before it woke us up. In that way, we could go to sleep without worrying about them, knowing that if the alarm clock hadn't gone off, all was well.
Sometimes we heard later that they had to throw themselves at the clock with seconds to spare.
Setting boundaries with teenagers isn't easy, but keeping our overall aim in mind, that we're helping them to take responsibility and to learn to set good boundaries for themselves, helps us through all the ups and downs of these turbulent years.
We're going to close this session with a prayer.
Lord, thank you that you guide us and show us the best way to live. Thank you that you give us your love and your boundaries, that we might live life to the full. Please help us to guide our teenagers so that they grow in trust and responsibility and become people who look out for others. Help us to give you our fears and our longings, so that as we let our children go, they may know a sense of freedom in becoming the people you've made them to be. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. In the next session, we'll be looking at handling anger, ours and theirs, resolving conflict and handling stress, all essential for developing emotional health. For now, please look at the questions for discussion in your manual. Goodbye.
Goodbye.